I never expected that a simple rainstorm, the kind that darkens the afternoon sky and rattles the window panes, would fundamentally change my life. But that's exactly what happened. It's funny how the biggest shifts often arrive without fanfare, disguised as ordinary inconveniences. For me, that inconvenience was a torrential downpour, and it led me to him. Or rather, it washed him directly into my quiet, carefully ordered world. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was a 28-year-old graphic designer who worked primarily from home. My life ran on a predictable and, if I'm being honest, slightly lonely schedule. My apartment was my sanctuary, a third-floor walk-up in an old brick building with good bones and drafty windows. It was my castle and my fortress, a place where the chaos of the outside world was kept at a comfortable distance. I had my routines: coffee at 7, work until noon, a short walk if the weather was nice, more work, then dinner alone with a book or a movie. It was a stable existence, but not a particularly vibrant one. I was content, or so I told myself. I had my work, which I loved, and a few good friends I saw on weekends. But there was a quiet hum of longing beneath the surface, a desire for a connection that felt deeper than a friendly text message or a shared beer. I'd grown adept at ignoring it, at filling the silence with podcasts and the low thrum of my computer. I was an observer by nature and by profession, someone who noticed the subtle shift in color palettes, the elegance of clean typography, and the way light fell across a room. I was good at seeing the world, but not always so good at participating in it. Then Caleb moved in across the hall. It was a Saturday in early May. I remember the sound of heavy furniture scraping against the floorboards and the low, masculine voices echoing in the hallway. I peeked through my peephole, a habit I wasn't particularly proud of, and saw him for the first time. He was directing two other guys, and he moved with a kind of easy confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply fascinating. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt, and his dark hair was a mess of sweat-dampened curls. Over the next few weeks, my observations continued. I learned his routine by proximity. He left early in the mornings, often carrying a sturdy-looking tool bag, and returned in the late afternoon, smelling faintly of sawdust and varnish. He was a carpenter, a woodworker. It seemed so fitting, so tangible and real compared to my digital world of pixels and vectors. He seemed to embody a kind of grounded masculinity that felt like it belonged to another species. The kind of guy who knew how to fix things, who built things with his hands. The kind of guy I automatically and protectively filed away as unattainable. Our interactions were minimal, limited to the brief, polite choreography of neighbors sharing a hallway. A nod, a quick, hey, a moment of holding the main door open for one another. He had a nice smile, a little lopsided, that reached his eyes. They were a warm, hazel color, I noticed during one fleeting exchange. Each time we passed, my heart would give a stupid little flutter, a nervous twitch that I'd immediately suppress. He was just a neighbor, a handsome, friendly, and almost certainly straight neighbor. It was a story I told myself to keep my own hopes in check, a defense mechanism honed over years of cautious living. Let me take you back to that rainy afternoon. It was a Tuesday, and I had broken my own rule of hermit-like living to make a necessary trip to the grocery store. The sky had been an ominous shade of gray all day, but the rain held off until the precise moment I was walking up the path to our building, my arms laden with two overflowing paper bags. The first drops were huge, splattering against the pavement like tiny water balloons. Within seconds, it was a deluge. I fumbled with my keys, cursing my timing, when I heard footsteps pounding behind me. It was Caleb, equally caught in the sudden downpour, his t-shirt already plastered to his chest. He wasn't carrying anything, just himself, looking as surprised by the cloudburst as I was. He reached the covered landing just as I finally managed to get the main door open, and we both stumbled inside, dripping and breathless. "Wow, that came out of nowhere," he said, laughing as he ran a hand through his soaked hair, sending a spray of water droplets onto the worn linoleum floor. His laugh was deep and genuine. It was the most I'd ever heard him say at one time. "Tell me about it," I replied, trying to sound casual as I readjusted my grip on the grocery bags, which were rapidly becoming damp and unstable. One of the bags began to tear at the bottom. I could feel a carton of orange juice threatening to make a break for it. It was a small, mundane disaster, but in that moment, it felt monumental. Before I could even react, Caleb was there. Here, let me help you with that. He gently took the compromised bag from me, his fingers brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. The touch was electric, a tiny jolt of warmth that shot up my arm. He cradled the bottom of the bag with his other hand, effortlessly preventing the impending grocery catastrophe. Thanks, I managed, my voice sounding a little thinner than I would have liked. We started up the 3 flights of stairs together, our wet shoes squeaking in an awkward rhythm. The air in the stairwell was thick with the smell of rain and damp earth, and now, something else. The faint, clean scent of his soap, mixed with the woodsy smell that always seemed to cling to him. It was intoxicating. When we reached our floor, the landing between our 2 apartments, I turned to him. Really, thank you. You saved my orange juice from a tragic end. I was trying for lighthearted, for normal. He smiled that lopsided smile again. Anytime. It's the least a neighbor can do. He handed the bag back to me carefully. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. Or maybe I was just imagining it. That was the problem with having a crush on someone. You start to see meaning in everything, every glance, every brief touch. You become a detective of phantom clues. As I fumbled for my apartment keys, I noticed he was shivering slightly. His thin shirt offered no protection against the chill that came with being soaked to the bone. An impulse, born of a mixture of genuine concern and a desperate desire to prolong the interaction, took over. Hey, do you want to come in for a minute? To dry off? I can make you a coffee or tea or something. To warm you up. The words hung in the air between us. It was the first real invitation, the first breach of the unspoken wall of neighborly distance. I braced myself for a polite refusal, and I'm okay, thanks, that would send me scurrying back into my fortress alone. He hesitated, just for a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it surprise? Or maybe the same kind of caution I felt? Then he nodded. Yeah, he said, his voice a little quiet. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And just like that, the world shifted on its axis. Caleb, the man from across the hall, was about to cross the threshold into my life. He stood awkwardly in my small entryway, dripping onto the welcome mat I'd placed there for exactly this kind of weather. He seemed to fill the space, his presence larger and more solid than I was used to. I felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness about my apartment. Was it too tidy? Too sterile? Did my collection of art prints make me look pretentious? Sorry, I'm making a mess, he said, gesturing to the puddle forming at his feet. Don't worry about it. It's just water, I said, trying to sound breezy and unaffected. Here, let me grab you a towel. I hurried to the linen closet, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I handed him a thick, dark gray towel, and he gratefully began to dry his hair and face. The simple, domestic act felt strangely intimate. Tea would be amazing, if you have it, he said, his voice muffled by the towel. Of course. Have a seat, I offered, gesturing vaguely towards my living room. I escaped to the kitchen, grateful for the task. It gave my hands something to do, a focus point other than the impossibly handsome, rain-soaked man who was now sitting on the edge of my sofa. I filled the kettle, my movements a little clumsy, and listened to the sound of the rain lashing against the kitchen window. The storm that had felt like an annoyance just minutes before now seemed like a gift, a stroke of benevolent fate. When I brought 2 steaming mugs of Earl Grey into the living room, he was looking at the prints on my wall. They were a mix of abstract geometric designs and minimalist landscapes I'd created myself. He had gotten up from the couch and was standing in front of a piece that depicted a series of overlapping circles in shades of blue and gray. Did you do these? He asked, turning to me. There was a genuine curiosity in his expression, not just polite interest. I felt a flush of pride mixed with anxiety. My work was personal. Yeah, I did. It's, what I do. I'm a graphic designer. They're really good, he said, his eyes scanning the print again. I like the balance. The way the colors work together. He pointed to a small detail. It's so precise, he understood. He wasn't just saying it was nice. He was seeing it. Thanks, I said, handing him his mug. Our fingers brushed again as he took it. And this time, the jolt was undeniable. I saw a flicker in his eyes that told me he felt it too. Or maybe, again, it was just my hopeful imagination running wild. He took a sip of the tea and let out a sigh of contentment. This is perfect. Thank you. Lucas, he had used my name. I knew he knew it from the mailboxes in the lobby, just as I knew his, but hearing him say it felt different. It made things more real. You're welcome, Caleb, I replied, testing his name on my tongue for the first time. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. The only sounds the gurgle of the radiator and the relentless drumming of the rain outside. The initial awkwardness began to melt away, replaced by a quiet, tentative warmth. The storm had created a small pocket of stillness in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, a bubble where two strangers could begin to become something else. But here's the thing about those moments. They make you brave. The warmth of the room, the shared tea, the quiet conversation, it all conspired to lower my defenses. I found myself wanting to know more about him, not just the version I'd constructed from hallway glimpses and the smell of sawdust. So, a carpenter? I asked, gesturing vaguely with my mug. I figured from the tool bag. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. Woodworker mostly. Custom furniture, cabinetry, that kind of thing. I have a small workshop downtown. He spoke about his work with a quiet passion that I recognized, the same way I felt about a perfectly kerned font or a harmonious color scheme. He talked about the feel of different woods, the challenge of a complex joint, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional with his hands. And as he talked, I saw a different side of him. The confident, almost imposing man I'd seen from my peephole was still there, but he was layered with a surprising thoughtfulness and an artist's sensitivity. The perceived distance between his world and mine began to shrink. We were both makers, just in different mediums. Then he surprised me. What about you? He asked, leaning forward slightly. What's it like, creating things on a screen? No one ever asked me that. They'd ask what clients I had, or if I could design a logo for their cousin's dog walking business. But he asked about the process, about the feeling. So I told him. I talked about the quiet satisfaction of aligning elements perfectly, the frustration and thrill of searching for the right idea, the magic of bringing a client's vague concept into sharp, vivid focus. We talked for what felt like an hour, maybe more. The storm raged on outside, a dramatic soundtrack to our unfolding conversation. And in that time, something shifted. We were no longer just neighbors. We were Lucas and Caleb. And then, he revealed something else. There was a particularly loud clap of thunder that rattled the old windows in their frames. I saw him flinch, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. His knuckles were white where he gripped his mug. You okay? I asked gently. He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. Yeah, sorry. It's stupid. I've never liked thunderstorms. He looked down at his hands, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Been that way since I was a kid. My older brother used to lock me in the closet during storms to be a jerk. Guess it just stuck. It was a small confession, but it felt huge. It was a crack in the self-assured facade, a glimpse of a vulnerability he probably didn't show to many people. The confident carpenter was afraid of thunder. It was such a human, grounding detail. It made him seem less like an intimidating crush and more like a real person. My heart ached for the little boy locked in the closet, and a wave of protectiveness washed over me. That's not stupid at all, I said, my voice softer than before. That's a completely valid reason to hate thunderstorms. He looked up and met my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of gratitude. It was a moment of pure, unadorned connection. A small, significant moment where the space between us felt charged with unspoken understanding. We weren't just talking about our work anymore. We were sharing pieces of ourselves. The rain began to soften, its frantic drumming easing into a steady, gentle patter. The sky outside was still gray, but a pale light was beginning to break through the clouds. The magic bubble of our storm-induced sanctuary was about to pop. Well, Caleb said, placing his empty mug on the coffee table. It's letting up. I should probably get back to my own place. Let you have your apartment back. You don't have to rush, I said, the words coming out faster than I intended. I didn't want him to leave. I wanted to stay in this warm, safe space we had accidentally created. I should, he repeated, but he didn't move right away. He just looked at me, his hazel eyes searching my face for something. I had no idea what he was looking for, or what he found there. Thank you again, Lucas, for the tea, and for the shelter. Anytime, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. He stood up, and I walked him to the door. The air was thick with things unsaid. The hallway between our apartments, once a neutral territory, now felt like a vast and complicated chasm. He was still just in his damp t-shirt, and I noticed him shiver again as I opened the door to the cooler air of the landing. "Wait," I said, another impulse taking over. "You're still soaked. Take my jacket. It's just across the hall. You can give it back whenever." Before he could protest, I grabbed my big, black raincoat from the hook by the door. It was oversized and not particularly stylish, but it was waterproof. He looked at the jacket, then at me. "It's literally 10 feet, Lucas. I think I can make it without melting." He was smiling, but there was a nervousness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. And then, I did the bravest, most ridiculous thing I have ever done in my life. The thought just popped into my head, a spark of insane brilliance. "Or, we could share it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I held the jacket open. "It's big enough. Just for the trip across." The suggestion hung in the air, absurd and intimate. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I was offering a solution to a problem that didn't really exist, creating a flimsy excuse for one more moment of proximity. I was showing my hand, laying my cards on the table, without even knowing what game we were playing. I fully expected him to laugh, to gently turn me down and end my mortifying gamble. But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he breathed. He stepped closer, and I held the coat open wider. He ducked under one side, his arm pressing against mine, his shoulder tucked against my chest. I wrapped the other side around my own shoulders, and for a moment, we were encased together in a small, dark, waterproof world. My mind went completely blank. All I could register were the sensory details. The heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cool, damp fabric of his shirt. The scent of him, rain and soap and sawdust, filling the small space and overwhelming my senses. The soft scratch of his stubble against my neck as we shifted to find our footing. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, and I was acutely aware of my own shallow, ragged breaths. We took a clumsy step out onto the landing, a single, four-legged creature shuffling awkwardly towards his door. It was only a few feet, a journey that should have taken 3 seconds, but time seemed to stretch and warp. The world outside our shared coat disappeared. There was only the sound of our breathing, the squeak of our shoes, and the frantic, desperate thumping of my own heart. We reached his door, and he stopped. He was still pressed against me, his head turned slightly towards mine. I could see the line of his jaw, the faint pulse fluttering in his neck. He began to fumble in his pocket for his keys, the movement jostling us closer together. And then it happened. As his fingers closed around his keys, a final, defiant clap of thunder echoed through the neighborhood. It was louder than any of the previous ones, a concussive boom that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. We both flinched. The world outside our little cocoon made one last, dramatic intrusion. In that split second of shared shock, Caleb turned his head. His face was inches from mine. His eyes, wide and dark in the dim hallway light, locked onto mine. I saw surprise and fear and something else, something that looked impossibly like desire. And then he closed the distance. His lips met mine. It wasn't a soft, tentative kiss. It was firm and urgent and full of all the unspoken tension that had been building between us. It was a kiss of pure, unthinking impulse, born of the storm both outside and within us. It tasted of rain and tea and a desperate, searching need. It lasted for maybe 2 seconds, a brief, stunning explosion of contact. Then, just as quickly as it happened, it was over. He pulled back, his eyes wide with what looked like his own shock. He didn't say a word. He jammed his key into the lock, twisted it, and slipped inside his apartment, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I was left standing alone in the hallway, the raincoat hanging limply from my shoulders. My lips tingled. My mind was a roaring torrent of confusion and elation and terror. The sound of the thunder still echoed in my ears, but it was drowned out by the thunder in my own chest. He had kissed me. Caleb had kissed me, and I had absolutely no idea what it meant. I stumbled back into my own apartment, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. I shut the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. I touched my lips, half convinced I had imagined the whole thing. But the feeling was still there, the ghost of his mouth on mine. My apartment, which had felt so warm and welcoming just minutes before, now felt charged and electric. The silence was deafening. I could hear the faint sound of the rain outside, the hum of my refrigerator, the frantic beating of my own heart. Across the hall, there was only silence. What just happened? The question replayed in my mind on an endless loop. He kissed me. Then he ran away. Did he regret it instantly? Was it a mistake? A weird, storm-induced moment of madness? The thought was a cold spike of fear in my gut. Maybe the vulnerability, the thunder, the close proximity, maybe it all just short-circuited something in him. And now, in the safety of his own apartment, he was horrified by what he'd done. I spent the rest of that evening in a state of agitated paralysis. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I couldn't eat. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying the kiss over and over again. I analyzed every single frame of the memory. The way his eyes had widened, the pressure of his lips, the speed of his retreat. It was a 2-second event that contained a universe of possible meanings, and my brain was determined to explore every single one of them. Hope was a treacherous, fluttering thing in my chest. It told me that the kiss was real, that it was the culmination of the connection we had just built. It pointed to the way he'd looked at my artwork, the way he'd shared his fear, the way he'd agreed to the ridiculous raincoat plan. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way I did. But fear was a much louder, more insistent voice. Fear told me I had misread everything, that I had pushed him, made him uncomfortable with my insane suggestion, that the kiss was an anomaly, a fluke, and that I had just made my living situation impossibly awkward. Fear reminded me that I was Lucas, the quiet observer, and he was Caleb, the confident carpenter. We were from different worlds, and I had foolishly tried to bridge a gap that was never meant to be crossed. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted, like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. The first thing I did was listen at my door. Silence. I waited, my stomach in knots, until I heard his door open and close, followed by his footsteps retreating down the stairs. He was gone. He had left without a word, without a knock, without any acknowledgement of what had happened. The silence was my answer, I thought. He was avoiding me. He regretted it. The hope that had fluttered so bravely the night before curled up and died, replaced by a dull, heavy ache of humiliation. I had been so stupid. So stupid. For the next 2 days, we lived as ghosts in the same hallway. I became hyper-aware of every sound. The creak of the floorboards, the jingle of keys, the thud of his work boots. I timed my own comings and goings to avoid him. I'd press my ear to the door before leaving, waiting for the all-clear. It was a miserable, nerve-wracking existence. The hallway, that short stretch of neutral space, became a minefield of potential awkwardness and rejection. I replayed our conversation in the storm, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I been too forward? Was I too open with my feelings? My mind became a torture chamber of self-doubt. I dissected every word, every glance, stripping them of their initial warmth and imbuing them with new, sinister meanings. His compliments about my art? Just him being polite. His confession about the thunder? A momentary lapse he now regretted sharing. The kiss? A terrible mistake. My quiet, orderly world had been shattered. The fortress of my apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a prison, and the one person I wanted to see was just 10 feet away, behind a closed door, as unreachable as if he were on the moon. The hope was still there, a tiny, stubborn ember refusing to be completely extinguished, but it was buried under a thick layer of anxiety and fear. What if I never knew? What if we just spent the rest of our time as neighbors living this silent, awkward lie? The not knowing was the worst part. On the third night after the kiss, I was sitting at my desk, trying and failing to focus on a design project. It was late, almost 11. The building was quiet. I had resigned myself to another night of restless anxiety when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. He always came home in the afternoon. He was never here this late. It had to be someone else. A neighbor with a noise complaint. A package delivery gone astray. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, and my breath caught in my chest. It was him. It was Caleb. He was just standing there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, his shoulders slumped. He looked nervous and tired, and utterly miserable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable. The apology. The "I'm not gay" speech. The "let's just be friends" conversation that would solidify my humiliation. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. He looked up, and his hazel eyes were filled with a raw, vulnerable emotion that stole the air from my lungs. He looked wrecked. "Hey," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Hey," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. An eternity of silence seemed to pass between us in the hallway. Then he spoke again. Can I come in for a minute?" I just nodded, unable to speak, and stepped back to let him in. He walked past me, stopping in the middle of my living room, in the exact spot where our strange, wonderful, and terrifying journey had begun. I closed the door behind him, the soft click sealing us inside, shutting out the rest of the world. The bubble was back, but this time it was filled with a fragile, unbearable tension. He turned to face me, his hands still jammed in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor, at the wall, at anything but me. "Lucas," he started, then stopped, letting out a frustrated sigh. "I am so sorry." There it was. The apology. My heart sank. "It's okay," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a reflex, a placating gesture to make this easier for both of us. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were pleading. No, it's not okay. I'm not sorry for kissing you. I'm sorry for how I acted after. For running away. For hiding from you for 3 days like a coward. That was not okay. And you didn't deserve that." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. He wasn't sorry for the kiss? I don't understand," I stammered. He took a step closer, his gaze locked on mine. "I've wanted to do that for weeks, Lucas," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Pretty much since I first saw you. I'd see you coming and going, always with your head in a book or looking at something so intently. I was captivated. But I'm new to this." To this, he gestured vaguely between the two of us. "I've never felt this way about a guy before, and it scared the hell out of me." The confession hit me like a physical blow, knocking all the air out of my lungs and replacing it with a dizzying, soaring hope. He was scared. He wasn't disgusted or regretful. He was just scared. I knew that feeling. I lived with that feeling. "That day," he continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident, "when I got caught in the rain, I didn't just happen to be coming home. I saw you walking from my window, and I ran downstairs. I just wanted an excuse to talk to you, a real conversation. And then you invited me in, and everything was so much better and more terrifying than I imagined. You were so kind and smart, and you saw things you saw me. And I panicked. The thunder," I whispered. "The thunder was real," he said with a small, wry smile. "I really do hate it. But it was also an excuse. A catalyst. When you offered to share that coat, I thought my heart was going to explode. It was the most absurd and wonderful thing. And when that thunder hit, I just stopped thinking. I just did what I'd been wanting to do for a month. And then my brain turned back on, and all the fear came rushing back in. So I ran. All the pieces clicked into place. His hesitation, his nervousness, his disappearance. It wasn't rejection. It was self-preservation. He had been just as lost and terrified as I was. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest for 3 days dissolved, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. "I thought you regretted it," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I thought I had imagined everything." "No," he said, taking another step closer. He was right in front of me now, so close I could feel the warmth of his body again. "I haven't been able to think about anything else. I haven't slept. I've just been pacing my apartment, calling myself an idiot. An idiot for kissing you, and an even bigger idiot for running away." He slowly, tentatively, reached out and placed his hand on my arm. His touch was warm and steady. Not a jolt, this time, but a grounding force. "Lucas," he said, his voice dropping to a low, earnest whisper. "I'm not scared anymore. Just really, really hopeful." And that was all I needed to hear. I closed the small gap between us and kissed him. This time, there was no surprise, no panic, no frantic urgency. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a kiss of mutual understanding, of shared vulnerability, of 1,000 unspoken questions finally being answered. It tasted of relief and apology and the breathtaking promise of a new beginning. When we finally pulled apart, We were both smiling. The storm was finally, truly over. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet discovery. We didn't need grand gestures or dramatic dates. Our romance unfolded in the small, ordinary moments. It was him showing up at my door with coffee in the morning. It was me leaving a plate of dinner for him when he worked late. We spent hours in his workshop, the air thick with the scent of cedar and pine, as I watched him transform raw blocks of wood into things of beauty and grace. He'd come over to my place and watch me work, fascinated by the way a design could come to life from nothing on a screen. We learned the rhythms of each other's lives, not as observers from across a hall, but as participants. We learned about each other's families, our pasts, our dreams for the future. He was still the strong, capable man I first saw, but now I knew the thoughtful artist and the scared little boy underneath. And he learned that beneath my quiet, observant exterior was someone with a deep capacity for love and a well of courage I never knew I possessed. The hallway between our apartments was no longer a chasm, but a bridge we crossed a dozen times a day. A few months later, we were curled up on my sofa, watching a movie. Outside, a summer storm had rolled in, a gentle rumble in the distance. The rain was a soft, steady drumming on the roof, a peaceful, comforting sound. As a low growl of thunder vibrated through the room, Caleb turned to look at me. There was no fear in his eyes, only a warm, gentle amusement. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, comfortable kiss that felt like coming home. "You know," he murmured against my lips, "I think I'm starting to like thunderstorms." I laughed and pulled him closer, my heart full to bursting. The thing that once represented fear and confusion had become the symbol of our beginning, a fond memory that we would always share. It's strange, isn't it? How a life can be defined by before and after. Before the storm and after the storm. Before Caleb and after Caleb. I never expected that a downpour and an act of ridiculous, hopeful bravery under a shared raincoat could change everything. But it did. It taught me that sometimes you have to walk into the storm. You have to be willing to get soaked. Because you never know who you might find there, waiting to share their coat and their heart with you.